Hello, everyone. Good morning if it's morning where you are, and good afternoon if it's afternoon where you are, and good evening if it's evening where you are. Welcome to this exciting panel, the title of which I've forgotten, but is apparently I can't read the rest of it. Do either of you remember the official title of what we're doing?
Coming out, coming of age, I believe.
Yes, that. With debut authors Ray Stoeve and Robbie Couch. Ray is the author of Between Perfect and Real, and Robbie is the author of The Sky Blues. And my name is Kyle Lukoff. I'm the author of a lot of books for kids, including the picture book When Aidan Became a Brother, and also the middle grade novel Too Bright to See. And I'm super excited to be moderating a conversation between these two people. And I think we're just going to get started. Is that okay with you all? Or do you want to say more things about yourselves?
I'm great.
I'm good to go. Yeah, let's
Cool.
do it.
So I'm going to try to avoid spoilers for people who haven't read the books. But spoiler alert, both of these are LGBTQ themed young adult novels. And the questions are going to be related to those topics because that's pretty much the only thing that I ever want to talk about. So the first question that I have for both of our panelists is where they got the idea for this very specific story of a queer teen experience. So like in Robbie's book, spoiler alert, Sky, the main character, is out as gay at the very beginning of the story. And Ray also in our conversation before this said something about how it's often assumed that our books are autobiographical in nature and wanting to talk about how we navigate including our experiences or not including our experiences. And so I'm curious about what questions you two were choosing to raise in your books and why.
Yeah, do you want me to get started? I can take it. I can go first. Okay. So yeah, I guess to answer your question, I very intentionally wanted to have Guy already be out at the beginning of the novel. So right when you meet him, right in chapter 1, he's fresh out of the closet, but he's still out of the closet. And I do feel as though, although I love a good coming out story, and many of my favorite LGBTQ stories have a coming out arc to it, I sort of felt like there's this like post coming out period that a lot of young people go through that isn't captured in stories as much, where, you know, there's a lot of, you know, post coming out anxieties and awkwardness and kind of traveling through the world and navigating that in an openly queer body for the first time can be kind of daunting and overwhelming. And there can be really great, magical, beautiful moments and then really tough, challenging moments. And so with Sky, it was pretty intentional for me to capture that period, just because, you know, a lot of times with coming out stories, I know there's sort of the build up to the coming out moment. And sometimes it's rainbows and sunshine when they come out. And that's the case a lot of the time, and that's wonderful. But oftentimes there's a lot of emotion that comes after that. So that's right where you meet Sky. And yeah, and then his story kind of goes from there.
Nice. Yeah. Like for me, the specific story, the way that it came to me, like, it was a very long time ago in 2009 when I first started questioning my gender, and that was when I first started writing. Like I wrote a couple of vignettes of Dean's story back then and had some characters and then put it down for years. But for me, it kind of came about like thinking about like my own teen experience, and one of the things that I landed on was how I had always wanted to play male roles in theater but never got to. And so Dean's story really came out of wondering, like, I wonder like what it would have been like for me if I had been able to, or like gotten to play a more gender affirming role. Like I was actually in Romeo and Juliet in high school in my senior year. I wanted to play Mercutio, who is the badass of, you know, the play, but I was a henchman instead, which was also awesome because I got to do stage combat. But yeah, I was just thinking about that experience, and then I've always been a writer. Like I've always loved to write since I was a kid, and I was like, I wonder, like, what if I wrote a story about a kid who did get cast, you know, in a gender affirming role? And so in a way, for me, like in that respect, there is a lot of me in the origin of the story, because it started as a sort of like wish fulfillment, or like almost like an alternate timeline. Like, yeah, kind of what would it have been like for me?
Thank you. The second question is really about the importance of place in both of your books. And something that I loved in both of your books was how clear and specific and fully rounded the place was. So Ray's book takes place in Seattle, which is near where I grew up, actually, but then also there's scenes that take place very specifically in the neighborhood of Capitol Hill, which is not where Dean lives. And Robbie's book takes place in rural Michigan, not the UP, but still in northern Michigan, right? And in both books, the place is extremely important for the characters. And I was so like they both want to leave, they both struggle with that decision. There's like this sense of like my real life is starting somewhere else, but also my life is starting here. And I was wondering if you two could talk about both how you envisioned the sense of place as its own character, like the setting as its own like person or character that interacts with each character in different ways, and then also the different characters' relationships to their hometowns.
Yeah, well, with the Sky Blues, and thank you for asking about like the Upper Peninsula. I feel like everyone forgets about the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. It's just sort of like all like very few people live there, so a lot of people forget about it. But no, it's not in the Upper Peninsula. It's in northern Michigan in the Lower Peninsula, nearish Traverse City. A lot of people from Michigan, I don't know if people know that we do this, but like, yeah, we have the hand up to point where we are in the mitten, so it's like up in this region of northwest Michigan. But to answer your question, yeah, even in the title, the Sky Blues is sort of hitting at this sort of like duality. The color blue is pointing towards the natural beauty of the state. So there's a character, Miss Winter, who talks about the blues being bluer up in that area. It's really gorgeous. They live right on the coast of Lake Michigan, so it's a really, really pristine area. It's sort of a touristy area. So there's that natural beauty that's there, and I really like how you put that in the sense that it's another character in the book in a certain sense, but then at the same time Sky is having the blues in the sense that he's dealing with a lot of tough issues. He's openly gay, he's dealing with parental rejection, he's dealing with homophobic bullies in his school, and so it's sort of this like, I guess, dichotomy in a certain sense of like the beauty and the good and the bad. And something that Sky, and I know spoilers, but something that Sky sort of learns throughout the story is that, you know, he feels very isolated and trapped in his small town. But as time goes on, he learns and discovers that there are many other people in his town who have his back and who also feel othered and different in other ways. And so there's sort of a solidarity that builds among many folks who feel like they don't belong there. So yeah, so the color blue kind of plays a role into that as well. But yeah, I think that the sense of place is something that was really important for me to work into the theme of the book for sure.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying about how even within a place where you look at it and think that like everybody's having the same experience, there's actually a lot of different experiences, including like a lot of people who feel alone the same way as the main character does. And that's, yeah,
Totally.
I really like that. Yeah, I think for me, like, it sounds like you grew up in Michigan, Robbie.
I did. Yeah, I didn't grow up in the specific area that Sky is from, but I grew up outside of Flint, Michigan, so kind of in southeast Michigan.
Where?
Give me a second. Yeah, I know. Sorry, down in this area.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, Washington is like this, right? You can't really make Washington with your hand like this.
No, like, yeah, Washington would be like.
There's like yeah.
There you go.
I'm from here. I'm from here in Washington.
Okay. Nice. But yeah, so Between Perfect and Real is set in Seattle, where I'm also from. And I think for me, like thinking about how different people experience the same place, like along that similar theme. Like I always experienced Seattle as like, I grew up in North Seattle, which is north of downtown proper and of Capitol Hill, which was and still is the gayborhood. And I always grew up thinking of Capitol Hill as like this mythical place where I would go and then find all the gay people and like live my best gay life. And so for Dean, like he has places that he goes for comfort and thinking, like in his neighborhood, which are also my places, like Carkey Park. And then Capitol Hill is this place where he gets to go and be like a different version of himself, and explore and like meet new people and start to like see that like maybe kind of like Sky, like his life is like a little bigger and the people in it are like a little bigger than he imagines. And I also like wanted to show that trans teens have challenges everywhere and anywhere. Like I think there's sort of like that a lot of folks in more like liberal areas have this idea that like it's horrible to be gay in rural places and it's great to be gay in the cities, and like there's bigots everywhere. And there was certainly like bullying in my high school growing up of gay teens, and there's bullying now, and so I wanted to like show that. And then also like for me on almost petty level, but a personal level, I feel like Seattle is like often represented in literature as like the Pike Place Market, Space Needle, rain, and coffee. And for me, like I feel very much like who I am is rooted in this place. Like I am me partly because of the place that I grew up and the like history and the demographics and the neighborhoods and how that ties into like how power and like privilege and how people experience each other in the city. I feel like that all makes me who I am and makes Dean who he is, and his experience what it is. And so I wanted to like just show Seattle beyond like the kind of like one-dimensional thing that it often is in literature.
I always think about Starbucks, so I hear that. I hear that for sure. Yeah. And I also wanted to note really quick, sorry, Kyle, I love that you decided to kind of use Seattle as a point of like showing that transphobia exists even in these like liberal urban areas, because I feel like the Sky Blues is almost the exact opposite in that, where I'm using like a small town to show like, hey, you can find allies here as well. It's just so much more gray than I think sometimes we think about, like, you know, red counties and blue counties, and this is where all the accepting people live and vice versa. So I think that's a really good point, right? And I think I was kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum making that same point.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, that was actually like, yeah, something that I noticed about both of yours is that you're doing the same thing, but in a lot of ways you're doing very similar things in almost like opposite ways. Also, I'm holding a random fidget. It's nothing weird. It's just I need to do something with my hand.
Totally
I think we could also talk about like the role of place forever, but I also wrote all these questions and I want to get into more of that if that's cool. So number 3, again, like you are doing very similar things with your books in that both of you wrote characters who are out in one way or about one thing, but are also like closeted, to use a clunky metaphor, or like more private about other parts of a related identity. So like in the Sky Blue, Sky is out as gay, but he's really careful not to be like too gay. Like he doesn't want to show anyone just how gay he is, or like how that manifests in him. And then in Ray's book, Dean is like out as like a butch tomboyish lesbian, but isn't. Like he knows that he's a trans guy. That's not a spoiler. I know that's not a spoiler.
It's on the
obviously there. It's like literally there. But like so there's a question there, like can you be out as a lesbian if you aren't actually that? And like I love the ways that I love the like different like complicated and nuanced ways that you talk about like outness and inness and like what we keep to ourselves versus what we share with people around us. And I think that like we as like queer authors do that the best. And I was wondering if the two of you could talk more about the tensions in that.
Yeah, I
Ray,
can
you can go first. Yeah, because I feel like Kyle set you up really well there, so go for it.
totally. I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want you to have the pressure of like always being the first person to talk. Yeah. Uh, yeah. I think like for me, I wrote like messiness and complexity really matters to me, and I think that it's something that like it took me my whole life, even to like the last 5 years, to really embrace and affirm that in myself. And I like didn't have that growing up. It was like, you know, there was like the one narrative for like each orientation that was like out there in the media, and like that's what I absorbed. And like I think in writing this book, I just really like wanted to reflect that for teens, because I know like when I was growing up, I had so many questions about like, can I be a this or can I be a that if I don't have this experience or that experience? Like, am I really bi if I've like only dated dudes? You know, and I think like that stuff is like so painful and it can be really tortured. And um, like um, once I was more able to like embrace like just the like non-linear nature of like learning who you are over time with like new experiences and new information and new terminology, it became a lot easier for me. And so like with Dean, I wanted to kind of show him cycling kind of like out of one identity and into another one, even though, you know, whether that's not the linear process in and of itself, but it's like how he maybe appears to other people because it's my experience. And I want to like affirm that for kids reading the book, that like you can like you can reveal as much as of yourself as you want to or as you have access to. And once you learn new things about yourself, or once you come to terms with new things about yourself and find the words to share them, it doesn't make who you were before a lie, or that this is now the real you. Like um I wanted to show the process rather than just like the product or like the narrative, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I love the way you put that. Yeah, because that's life, and that's identity when you're younger, and or not even necessarily when you're younger, but just when you're trying to figure out who you are. It's rarely a very cut and dry, easy thing. It's a process, and I love what you said. It's a process, and not about the product. It's very cool. And I also totally hear you on constantly evolving as a queer person and like taking in new experiences and letting that inform who you are. Like this is something super tiny and it's not that big of a deal, but I painted my nails for the Sky Blues, and it was the first time that I painted my nails. And if you would have asked me a decade ago to paint my nails as an openly gay guy, I probably would have said no, just because I felt like, well, I don't want to be a stereotype, or I don't want to, I kind of had all of these negative connotations about it. And it was pretty cool to be able to do that, even though I'm, 32 years old now, and be like, cool. And like I said, it's not a huge deal, but it's still a reflection of my own kind of journey with queerness and exploring, gender. Um, but to tie it back in with Sky, yeah, Sky is openly gay, as I mentioned, but he's kind of navigating his small town, being an openly queer person for the first time. And there's a scene right in chapter 1 where he's walking through the parking lot of his school, and he feels like he's walking gay. That's how he kind of thinks about it, and he is immediately self-conscious of knowing that there's some homophobic bullies in the parking lot that are like looking at him and judging him and could be mocking him or bullying him. And so he immediately starts walking straighter. And you kind of are on this journey with Sky, kind of feeling comfortable and more authentic in his own skin, just being however he wants to be and walking however he wants to walk and carrying his books the way he wants to carry his books in school. And yeah, that process was really important for me to kind of capture with his stories. And I think it's also important to note that like a lot of it isn't just about having the freedom to express yourself, although that's like a big part of it, but a lot of it is also about like personal safety, right? Like Sky felt like if he expressed himself in a certain way, he would attract not just negative tension, but maybe something more than that, right? Like violence or something that really takes it up a notch in a more direct way. And so I think that's also important to acknowledge too, is that a lot of times these struggles with coming out, it's not just an internal battle, but also just about survival in these communities and in these spaces. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah, totally. That there's different, like, you know, like senses of safety that you have in different relationships and different parts of yourself that you can show. And I love the point you're making about your nails, because I feel like I've had the same experience, like when I started to transition and I was on T for 3 years, and like once I was more, read as male consistently for a while, suddenly painting my nails became this huge deal in my head, and it was something I had to reclaim. And it's like these like small things, like I think probably like our characters focus, like Dean focuses a lot on like, the way things feel on his body and the way people are looking at him, and like, his body posture and observing the men around him and how they interact, and like these things that are seemingly small, like can represent so much.
Yeah, it's just nail polish, but it's so much more than nail polish.
But it's nail polish, yeah.
When I was first like, I only came out as a trans guy when I realized that I could also be a gay man. And when I was like, when I like was identifying more as like a queer woman, I was like exactly as masculine as I am now, which is just like not very, but I have short hair, which counts for something. And then once I realized that I could transition, I was like, oh, like as soon as I'm like consistently read as male, I'm gonna like wear nail polish and eyeliner, and I'm gonna wear like sparkles and pink shirts. And then I was consistently read as male, and I still dressed exactly the same as I have literally always dressed as soon as I could, which is like t-shirts and jeans and no accessories because I don't like them. And I really was like, I'm going to embrace my femininity. And then I was like, no, I'm just going to be gay. Like, I don't, I still don't like accessories. I still don't want to. Yeah, no, it's funny. It's fine.
I love it.
So question 4, I'm reading them out of my little notebook because I like to handwrite
I also
things.
have notes.
So actually, I'm literally just quoting Ray for this question. As we were all like emailing prior to this, Ray had been talking about coming out as a specific experience, as sort of a microcosm of the general coming of age struggle that all teens go through, that also can't be generalized. And you had wanted to talk about how you kind of navigate that tension of like coming out as like specific, but almost like a synecdoche or like for something larger, and how you manage to maintain like how you manage to find like the universal in the specific, such a thing as possible.
Yeah. I think for me, I think a lot about this because queer books often get positioned as being like inspirational or educational, in some way, or like this is a coming out story that everyone can relate to, like that kind of positioning. And for me, like I am aware that straight and cis people will read this book, which is great, and I want them to. I wrote it for trans and queer teens, and that's for me like there could be a temptation to sort of like flatten the narrative and make it like understandable or palatable. But for me, I was like, the reason that this book shows as much of the like messiness and the process as it does is because I'm aware that like people who don't have this experience are going to read it, and they should be getting the messiness and they should be getting the complexity. And so for me, I think like we often think that people like can't relate to the very specific parts of queer and trans experience, but I feel like that does like everyone a disservice, like us and people who don't share that experience. And I think that like I think you said, Kyle, like the universal is in the specific, like everyone in their coming of age or they're like coming to selfhood has this like this process that they're going through, and so it might not be like transition or changing names or pronouns and like all that kind of nuts and bolts stuff, but I think showing the like giving more attention to like the specific experience and like moving away from like the flattened coming out arc as inspirational or education for straight people is like where I want to go in my writing, or like how I like deal with that feeling of like this needs to be educational and perfect. Like, well, then it's not going to be that. And that's the point.
You said coming out arc, but I heard coming out park as inspirational and informative for straight people. And I was suddenly imagining like a theme park where you could like, where like straight cis people could like go to learn about like, this is what it's like to be
roller coaster of dysphoria.
I think this is like $1 billion idea. Let's do it.
No. Okay, let's circle back to this on email.
Oh my gosh, so funny. Well, yeah. First, Ray, I totally hear you on like writing a book that's like struggling between knowing what's palatable for like straight readers versus like how queer to make it. Like even in the very first pages of The Sky Blues, it starts out in kind of like a little bit of like a steamier like daydream that Sky is having. And for a minute I was like, is this gonna like make straight readers turn away? And I was like, you know what? This book is not for them anyways. Like I would love for them to read it and get a kick out of it, but like it does, yeah. So I totally hear you on that. I kind of interpreted this question in thinking about like how to craft the characters, I guess, in a certain way as it relates to coming out. And for me, because there really is no, as you sort of mentioned, there's no like universal coming out experience. Really, everyone is on a different journey. If I asked all of my gay friends, you know, what was coming out like for them, we would all have a different story. We all came out at slightly different ages and got different reactions, and we did it different ways. Like I wrote letters to everyone. I know other people did it very differently. So yeah, there's lots of differences in that regard. And the way that I guess I would think about it with crafting characters and story is just really centering the characters first and thinking about, okay, who are they? What motivates them? What are their, you know, strengths and weaknesses, and really developing them as a character, and then trying to think about what coming out would look like for them specifically, as opposed to trying to fit them into a box of just like this, you know, nice little packaged coming out story. So that's kind of how I approached that question.
Yeah, I love that you really have to know the characters and have the story come from them and not from like planting the idea onto them.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
And then the idea of like what is or isn't palatable, Jesus. Both in like for teenagers, and then also books that like for different audiences. There's like there's so much to go into for that should just be like its own panel. Like what is too much for whatever. But that wasn't a question that I wrote down.
Well, I mean that's a great point, because I think like sorry.
No.
But just thinking about like Robbie, you're talking about the beginning of The Sky Blues, and I feel like I had a similar experience at the beginning of this story, which was the last thing that I wrote because it was so hard to figure out how to start the story. And finally, I just started it with, I think I might be trans. I mean, I know I am, I think. And like, that felt really dangerous to me, because it also feels like there's fear in trans communities and in queer communities that if you show the uncertainty, then that's going to delegitimize us and our experiences and become like fodder for bigotry and policy and all that. And yeah, I don't know. That's just what that made me think of when you were talking, Kyle.
I will say, and I'm not just saying this because we're like on a panel together, I legit got chills when you read the first line. I love that opening, and I feel like I already understand that character. I mean, I don't understand them fully, but I meet them in a place where I'm like, oh, I get it to some degree. Yeah, no, I think that's the idea. I know you didn't ask this question, Cal, but I'm going to go there anyways, thinking about what's palatable. Yeah, no, I also, something that I had to challenge myself was thinking about like the fact that I'm, you know, a 32-year-old writing for YA, and I can't just rely on my high school experience alone. I have to also put it into the context of how teens feel about gender and sexuality today, and what's palatable, not palatable for them. today. And I was also thinking like, okay, my parents are going to read this, older people are going to read this. How are they going to take this in? And then having to work through like, well, no, the book's not for them. So it is messy, and it is kind of thinking about what, what can work and what maybe won't work as well, for different audiences. But I think it was always important for me to like remind myself who this book is for and who's reading it, and why it would or would not resonate with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to keep your primary audience centered while also acknowledging that like gatekeepers exist, and also parents reading your book.
Yes.
So I only have 2 more questions left that I wrote down, which should leave us with like 10, 15 minutes for Q&A, but we'll see how long we talk about these last questions. And the last 2 are about relationships that your main characters have with other people. So another thing that I noticed that you're both doing in your books is that, so both of you are white, as am I, and both of your main characters are white. And then both of them have Black best friends, one of whom is a straight boy and one of whom is gay. And I've seen that happen in a lot of different books lately. And I was wondering if you could talk about that choice. Like, what were you trying to say about like different kinds of privilege and how that plays out in friendships, and like what solidarity can look like or doesn't look like? Diversity within a book without supplanting like Black queer authors, and just what all went into making how you each individually went into that choice.
Yeah. Do you want to start, Robbie, or should I?
Yeah, I'll go for it. For me, I think it was thinking about, well, I knew from square one that I wanted Sky so Sky is a marginalized person as a gay person in his hometown. At the same time, I think it was important for me to try to build that somewhat of like a solidarity between people who felt othered and felt different. And that went just beyond Sky's queerness as a gay person. So he does meet a trans character and sort of has an aha moment of thinking about his own privileges as a cisgender person in their town. He, as you mentioned, his best friend is Marshall, who is Black, and he has a kind of an aha moment with Marshall, thinking about Marshall's interactions with the police in their hometown, something that he really hadn't thought about until this moment. And so it was important for me to kind of build a world around Sky where he both, yes, he was marginalized, but he's also understanding his own privileges and how really they were invisible to him up until he kind of had these moments of realization. Because it was important for me to have Sky also on his own journey be building empathy with other folks in his town that could relate to him in some ways and couldn't relate to him in some ways, and vice versa. So yeah, that was important for me to kind of have those inclusive voices on the page. And I think it's especially, the responsibility especially lies on white authors to take that responsibility seriously. But like you said, without taking over too much space and allowing for Black writers to be able to tell their stories as well.
Yeah, I think like for me, I thought about this question a lot, and I also, Kyle, have noticed now that it's like quite common for white authors to write like a Black love interest or a Black best friend, and I'm very curious about like why we've all started doing this and like how we arrived at that choice. And for me, like thinking about Ronnie in this book, like I mentioned, I started writing this in 2009. Started writing meaning like I wrote a couple vignettes and then like went on my merry way as like an early 20-something-year-old mess of a person doing lots of different things. But I was like, that's like 11 years ago. I was 20, and originally there was not any thought put into that choice at all. And he was absolutely like a racist stereotype of a sassy gay Black friend, and that was like a product of the like white supremacy and like the racist stereotypes that I had like grown up with and internalized. And I learned and unpacked a lot in the next 6 years before I was a fellow at Hugo House. And then I was really lucky to have like writers of color around me in that fellowship and white writers who knew more than I did and were able to like point out to me, even though like I had by that time like realized that I had written a stereotype and was trying to, like change Ronnie's characterization and make him a real person. And I was lucky to like have people who were like able to point out that I was still not there and give me concrete feedback. And then like at every step of the way, like my agent, is white, but like really is on top of her stuff. And I had sensitivity readers, and I been thinking about this. I realized like it took me 10 years to write a secondary character who is Black, who is not a racist stereotype. Like 10 full years. And in that time, like I was unpacking my stuff, reading books. I was like in college for like sociology. I was a social justice organizer, doing like climate justice work with like in a multiracial coalition. Like I was like building relationships with Black people in the different areas of my life at that time. Like thinking about that, I hadn't fully thought about that part of it until I was thinking about this question. And for me, like, I almost see that as like a burden of proof in a way for white authors, that like, that's how deeply like whiteness is embedded in us, and how like ingrained like white supremacy is in us. And so for me, like thinking about like taking spots from other people, I would never ever attempt to write a Black main character, and it is baffling to me when white authors try that now, like especially thinking about like my own process to like Ronnie becoming the character he is now, which like I don't think I'm above criticism, and I feel good about like where Ronnie is now, but I also know that like some people will have critique for me, and like I welcome that. And I don't know, those are all the things that I thought about when I was thinking about this character. Is like for me it was not informed choice. It was not like a, I made it so long ago, and this book has been so long in the making, that like I just feel like I really like want white authors to be more transparent about how these choices originate and where from, and then what we're doing to like make sure these characters are like real people and not like learning objects or like stereotypes. I feel like I rambled for a long time, but yeah.
So that was what you are describing as rambling. I would describe as thorough. And I have to. There's a lot that you said that I really want to like go. I would say go home and think about, but I am home, so just stay home. Another like not super relevant, but another like micro genre that I noticed a few years ago was a trans girl main character, or like a trans girl character and a cis boy with some kind of like disability or something else going on. And it was like, I can think of at least 3 books like right off the top of my head where that happened.
Yes.
And it's like there's like micro genres where like 2 different like where relationships are like structured in like an identical way throughout like a small swath of books, and it's fascinating to look at.
Yeah, like what are the unconscious things at play when we decide that like these 2 narratives fit together? And I do think like Robbie, what you're saying, and like Kyle, how you were thinking about this question too, that like eventually like Dean and Ronnie's friendship is sort of a reflection of my own coming to like understand, and like having like friends of color who could relate to my experiences of being visibly trans in the world, or like and the ways that we can like build solidarity with each other, and like without supplanting, or like without setting aside the uniqueness in our experiences, and the like strength that there is in that too.
Or like flattening them as like, oh, we're all, so we all must know what it's like.
We all struggle. Yeah.
I was also going to note, Ray, and I don't think that was at all rambling. I was like glued to every word you were saying. But Yeah, I think also to the point of sensitivity readers, I use sensitivity readers with the Sky Blues, and I went in, um, where I had to check my own ego because I went in thinking like, oh, I really did, I put in research. I really thought thoroughly about like avoiding problematic themes, and I thought I had really been responsible with it, with who Marshall was, and um, and I was also going into it thinking that the sensitivity reader relationship would have been more not combative, but like just like them calling out everything wrong. And it was such a positive experience. Like I can't talk enough about how important it was for me to use sensitivity readers and work with them to make the story better, because it actually just improved the story so much more when you have authentic characters on the page representing marginalized groups. So if there's anyone like listening that is wondering if they should have a sensitivity reader or like how that process works, I highly encourage it. And I think it's really important, especially if you are from a group writing about a marginalized group that you can't relate to because you don't have the lived experience. So yeah.
Yeah. I have one last question that I wrote down, and that should leave us with like 10 minutes at the end, which just did that right. So the last question is also about relationships. And another thing that you two did like similarly is that both books include really important relationships with like older queer people. Not necessarily the same identity, but older people who've been like around LGBT communities for much longer than the teenage main characters. And like I always feel like intergenerational queer friendships and relationships, not romantic, but like all kinds of relationships are so important. And I would love for the two of you to talk about like why you included older queers to sort of like help the younger ones along the way.
Go for it, Ray.
Sure. Yeah, Mr. Harrison, the teacher that we all wish that we had. Yeah, it's so funny. Like I think that like intergenerational relationships are so important, and I feel sad that I don't have more in my life. I do, but like the older queer folks that I have had in my life, I feel like I've learned so much from them about like my place in this community and like in, I don't want to say history because I don't want like to, it's not like every like queer that's older than me is like this historical figure, because that's not how it is, but like just a sense of like belonging over time, I guess. And like the place that's been carved out and like where like what's been done before me, and then like I feel like I feel more grounded in myself as a result, and that also that they've been able to learn from me. And thinking about like Mr. Harrison, he very much who's the theater teacher, he very much started out as like sort of like the wise Yoda type of like mentor teacher who was perfectly accepting and like knew exactly what to do, and then someone was like, that's not realistic. Like he pointed out that he was just this like sort of cookie cutter like Yoda figure. And then that just made me think more about him as a person, and how like thinking about the one out gay teacher that I had in across like elementary and secondary school, then thinking about like, well, Mr. Harrison, has a picture of his presumably husband on his desk, and the kids know that he's gay, but like that's as far as it goes. And he doesn't know, like he's never known any trans people before Dean. And he has, painful memories of like being a young person and coming out. And so like, I think like for me, when I worked in education, and I think this is true for a lot of queer people, like we go into educational environments like wanting to be like a beacon of hope, or like make a safe space for kids who need that. And I think like what I wanted to show Mr. Harrison, and what I think can be true in intergenerational relationships, is that there's not going to be like perfection. Like we might not have the same terminology or the same knowledge or the same experiences, but like Mr. Harrison fundamentally like wants to be there for Dean and like wants to support Dean, and he doesn't do it perfectly, but he shows up and tries. And like I think that like that like his choice, which he may have, like been going out on a limb for him originally, is like, oh, should I do cross-gender casting in this play? Opens up Dean's whole journey. And I think, like, I don't know, that's like what older queer folks do for younger queer folks and vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think for me, it was sort of wanting to, I was thinking about when I read your question, I was sort of thinking about my own high school experience and middle school experience and my whole experience growing up. And there was really no openly queer people who were teachers or school administrators or coaches, or if they were, I never heard about it because I'm sure they felt very like they couldn't truly be openly queer in the same way that maybe they could now. I don't know, but it really, I don't know what that experience would have been like for me if I had been in high school and there had been openly queer teachers that I would have had. It would have probably made a really big difference. And I think for young queer people, part of the struggle that I know a lot of young queer people face is just kind of looking around them and feeling so othered and different and isolated because they don't see anyone who can share similar experiences with them who are older. And there's kind of this message being sent that there's not a future for you, or if you do have a future, it has to be something very specific out there that's like not here, right? Like it's just kind of this weird message that's being sent if you don't see any queer people who are adults and happy and living whatever life they want to live. So it was really important to me to have characters like Charlie in the book, in The Sky Blues, that who took a very similar route that Sky is taking, and is now a very, happy, fulfilled person. Certainly not perfect, but someone who Sky can look to and go, oh, okay, like I can get there. And it was also important to me to have Charlie live in an area that wasn't, he didn't just move off to LA, like I guess I technically did, but he actually lives in a small town in Michigan, which is like a whole other, I have such a soft spot for like openly queer people who are like badass allies in small town America and stand up for the little guy. That's so great. But yeah, so I think it's so critical that young queer people have openly queer people in their communities living as an example that this world has a place for you in it, and you can be yourself and see a future for yourself.
Yes, totally. The seeing a future for yourself part is huge. Yeah.
Especially because queerness is like, it's a horizontal identity, not a vertical identity. Like it's not something that's like passed down through. I mean, there are queer families that have queer kids in them, but mostly we show up in straight families more often than not. And so we have to, like, if we want to see that part of ourselves, we have to like find it, or it has to find us. It's not just like in our homes or in our neighborhoods, like it is like our racial identity might be in a lot of cases, or like our religion or whatever. Again, like there's no like one universal anything. Nothing is universal, but there's identities that are more vertical and more horizontal, and queerness is a more horizontal one. I think
I actually never heard it put that way, and that makes so much sense, like the visual of that. So thank you for naming that.
There's an amazing book by Andrew Solomon called Far from the Tree that I highly recommend you read. It's all about all these different kinds of horizontal identities, including like deafness and being trans, and like just like all different kinds of ways that like people might identify like with communities outside of their family. Oh, my cat just showed up. Hi, Shadow. So she's being shy. Maybe she'll come onto my lap. Oh, here she comes. So we've got about 11 minutes. We've got precisely 11 minutes for Q&A. And there was a question from someone named Elizabeth who's saying, in young adult fiction or teen films with gay characters, we often have the main character who is in love with the high school jock. In other words, a character that presents as very typically masculine. How come we don't see the story the other way around? I mean, one answer is misogyny, but I want to hear more about what y'all have to say. But also, wait, very important. We could just say that. Yes, I'm sitting on a beanbag chair. I'm an extremely successful and functional adult. But there's a cat. I love that.
Ray, do you want to take it first?
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, I feel
Not
like
to
this
put you
is
on the
like a,
spot. Sorry.
what's that?
I just said not to put you on the spot. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. I feel like this is a trope that I see more often in like gay male narratives. And so not having grown up as a gay man, I don't quite know what to say about it, but I do think, Kyle, that you're right that like it's misogyny, and I also like I'm not sure if I'm correctly fitting this idea into like a larger ism, but like I maybe think that part of that is that we don't think that people who are stereotypically like normative appearing, like masculine, could be interested in someone who is like like a femme man or like is gender nonconforming, because we see people who are not normative in their presentation as being fundamentally like undesirable or like maybe even like not even like human. And yeah, I guess that's where I would start with that. What do you think, Robbie?
No, I think I just did it. Ditto. Copy and paste that answer. That's great. I also feel like even with me at the beginning of the Sky Blues, I had to check myself because I was like, I totally had fessed up to having like a jock character that, and the story evolved so much since these very earliest days, back in 2016, I think. But at the time, my agent kind of checked me on it and said, "Well, we've seen this quite a bit. Like, are you sure you want to go down this route?" And I was like, "Oh, right." And I think for me, having like this conventionally hot quarterback, which I do think you see in a lot of like gay cis male like stories, yeah, it kind of leads into it. Yeah, it's very heteronormative in the way that it presents hotness or cuteness with all of that. And I think a part of me was also thinking like, as sad as it sounds, like instead of trying to change the status quo, like just fitting my story into what is already kind of acceptable. And I had to kind of go, no, I don't want to further that. Like I want to challenge that idea of what can be seen as like valuable or attractive or whatever it may be. So yeah, that's a good question though.
Yeah, totally.
Just to put on I used to be a librarian, so putting on my librarian hat, 2 books. So Lev Rosen is a young adult author that I think does a great job of like talking about like femme phobia and like mask worship. So there's Jack of Hearts and Other Parts, and then his other YA novel Camp are both very much about like masculinity and like faggotry and like flamboyance among teenage gay boys and like all the various complicated ways that those like interplay. Those are very good books. Highly recommend. There's another question in the chat from someone named Di asking, I want to hear more about the relationships between the main characters and their families. How does their families' opinions play into how they navigate their identities? Do you want to, like, you should take over this panel. That's a great question.
Yeah, that is, I guess I can go first because Ray, you did the first one. Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think with Sky, you learn pretty quickly off the bat that he has a very tough relationship with his family. His mother kind of took a very right-wing turn years before the story begins and is very unaccepting of his queerness. And so actually Sky is living with his best friend Bree at her home because he's really not welcome at home being openly gay. And so one of the really big themes that is present in the Sky Blues is the idea and the power of chosen family. And you know, towards the beginning of the book, when a few really nasty, horrible things happen to Sky, he definitely feels isolated and feels sort of homeless, not necessarily in the sense that he doesn't have a roof over his head, because he technically does, but homeless in the sense that he feels so displaced mentally and psychologically and doesn't have the comfort of feeling like home anywhere, in large part because of that family rejection. And then, without giving too many spoilers away, he certainly learns throughout the story that he does have family, and that he can kind of pick and choose the people that he wants to be around and the people who will love him unconditionally. And I think it's so critical that young queer people understand that, right? So you may be unfortunate, it may be unfortunate what family you're born into, but you can always have the control over your own trajectory to find the people who love you unconditionally and will be there for you. And it's so important for, I think, every queer person to know that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Like the idea of like found family and chosen family is something that's been really important in my life, and something that I tried to include in Between Perfect and Real too, is like Dean getting to see other examples of communities outside of family. And like for Dean, I was really interested in like, growing up, I read a lot of narratives where like the main character, had really unaccepting parents, and that there's like definitely a place for that narrative. And like obviously the Sky Blues is telling part of that story too. And I was interested in playing with like, what if you like have parents that are like really mixed in like how on board they are, and like, or maybe like are trying but not really like meeting the mark. And for Dean, like his mom is unaccepting of him even being a lesbian. She's just kind of like awkward about it in that way that straight people can sometimes be, and has kind of like offensive ideas about, or like maybe outdated ideas about that. And then really like doesn't react well when he comes out as trans to his parents. And his dad is very loving, but in trying to like, I think in trying to be in relationship with his wife, Dean's mom, doesn't stand up for Dean initially the way that he should as a parent. And I think that like, and Dean has like two different relationships with them, where with his mom, he's very conflictual and very kind of like, you're never going to accept me, like whatever, like, getting in fights. And with his dad, he can sense that love, but with his dad, it's almost more like, he's more able to access his heartbreak about it in a way, because dad is so close. And so it hurts more that dad hasn't stood up for him in the past, and that dad has made mistakes, and that dad hasn't been there for him, because it's like so close. And over the course of the story, you see like their relationships start to change. Like mom maybe like starts to come around a little bit, and dad starts to show up more and try to like hold mom accountable. And like dad in a way is like a representative of like what I feel like a good parent should be, is like accepting that you're not going to be perfect all the time, but like when your kid is like, this hurt me, being able to just sit there and like take it in and change your behavior, to like continue to like love and support the person that they're becoming. I feel like I'm just like going on a tangent again, but yeah, I think for me, like just showing like the different ways that Dean navigates the two different relationships and like the effect that has on him.
That's actually something that the two of you did again that you have in common, which is I feel like I see a lot of times the like really supportive mom and the really lousy dad, and both of you did kind of the opposite. Like both of your moms, like not your moms, both of the moms that you wrote,
right,
like kind of suck. But like Dean's dad is pretty cool, and we get the sense that Sky's dad would have been pretty cool. I didn't even think about that, but that's so cool.
I love that.
There was one last question that I feel like we talked about earlier, but we also only have like 30 seconds left. But did either one of you want to say anything more specific about the steps you took to ensure that the characters of color you wrote weren't based in stereotypes? The question is, do you speak to other people of color, like friends, focus groups, etc.? You both mentioned sensitivity readers, and Ray, you talked more about the work that you've done. And I'm wondering if there's any last thing you want to say to answer this person's question before it's time to go, which is
I would also. Oh, okay.
No, go ahead, Robbie.
Oh, do you want me to? Okay, I'll be quick. I promise. So I was very careful. I think you certainly can talk to close friends who are people of color, and I did that. But at the same time, I also was very mindful of like not wanting to put a burden on them to explain like you know, all of this stuff to me. It's not their job to do that. So it was important to me beyond sensitivity readers to work with an editor and an editing team that really got it and we're on the same page in terms of prioritizing that, which is something that I think is important for any author to be thinking about, is the team you're working with and making sure that your editors and the team really, that's a big priority to them, to make sure you're getting that right and you're going through the necessary steps to get it right, because it can go very wrong. So yeah.
It's time, and we have a 30-second lag, so we're all gonna turn off our videos. Well, I'm gonna actually show the cat for 30 seconds. But thank you so much, Rain and Robbie. I had a great time, and I hope that we can all hang out someday.
Likewise. Thank you so much, both of
Yay.
you.
Yeah.
All right, so shadow for 30 seconds, and then goodbye.